Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you my top tips and some techniques that you can use for drawing realistic dog noses. Now let's jump straight into the tutorial because this is all about the layering process. Now the first thing that I like to do is map in the shape of the nostrils. One of the most important things though with this colour nose is I'm not mapping those out with black. If I had a black nose or a darker brown nose, that might be the case, but with something like this where there are a lot of oranges and redder tones, I don't want to be jumping in with a black first. Now the reason being, I want to avoid any muddying up of my colours and my layers. That can happen very easily when you're working on something like this. So that would be my first tip. Look at how many colours I've put down on the nostrils first, and only now am I using a black over the top. So I'm going to repeat that process for the other nostril. Now the reason why I also want to put the nostrils in first is the placement and shape of these nostrils are really important. If they're not right and accurate to the reference photo, it will really draw the viewer's eye to that one part of the portrait. It can be very distracting. So you want to make sure that the nostrils are positioned in the right place. Again, as I say, that is so important and why I always map those in first. So step 2, and that is the base layer. For this I'm using my PanPastels because they do blend really nicely, and for my base layer here for noses, that's exactly what I want. I don't want there to be any harsh start and stop points even at this very first layer. My main aim when drawing any nose is I want to make sure I've got the 3D shape. So I really do want to make sure that I roll it over from the edge of the nostrils across the front surface. That's really going to help to build up so much more form and depth to the nose, regardless of the animal that you're drawing. Then, after the PanPastel base layer, it is all about the layer of refinement. Now this is one of the most important layering processes of the entire thing, so it's really important that we don't skip past this. Before we get into this section, I really would appreciate it if it's been useful so far, if you could give the video a thumbs up because it really does help. And if you do want to get notified of all of the content that I upload at various different mediums, then hit the subscribe and the bell button. It's very much appreciated. So that layer of refinement, you'll notice that I'm using my pastel pencils and I'm really reinforcing the shape of the nose. I am not focusing on any kind of detail whatsoever. I'm just focusing on my lights and my darks. Now one of the big techniques here that can help massively with doing that is to turn your artwork upside down and your reference photo upside down, and that will force your brain to see the nose as an abstract shape rather than a dog's nose. So that can really help here. Something that I also focus a lot on the YouTube versions and my slower in-depth tutorials on Patreon is working in smaller sections. So just here, not just with the nose, it's with the fur, eyes, grass, any element, I will always break it down into small sections and then the individual layers, exactly as I'm demonstrating here. If my in-depth tutorials on Patreon are of interest, I will link that in the description below, but I've also got a Patreon library on my website where you can see all of the tutorials in the tiers that I've got on offer there, so that you can see the type of content that is immediately available as soon as you sign up. I focus on the pet portrait side of things and also the range of wildlife subjects that I've got, so that anybody who potentially might want to be focusing on pet portrait commissions in the future has a wide range of fur textures, breeds, horses, dogs, cats, that they can then implement the tips and techniques that I show in their own work. So as I've said, if that's of interest, I will make sure I link it below. So once I've got a good base foundation in place, that's when I start working more with sharper pencils and reinforcing the first layer of detail. Now I'm still not focusing on the highlights that are the brightest, that are sitting on the very top. I need to still be leaving those for the very last layer. But here I can now start to indicate it more of that bumpier texture that some noses have. Now the nose texture is going to vary depending on the animal that you're drawing. It's going to be very subjective to that one pet, so I do want to make sure that I've got it right. But I still want to make sure, regardless of the texture, that my brightest details are left for those last layers. Now with that being said, a big tip, if you do have a really bright highlight on the nose, make sure if you want to keep that nice and white that you put a white pencil down first. You can then potentially run the risk, if you put the white highlight in now at this layer, that it's going to pick up some of those redder and browner layers that we've put down previously, and potentially the white may not be as bright. So this is something that I do with eyes. If I have a very bright highlight, I do usually put a bit of that white pastel down first to preserve that and get it as bright as I can. And that leads me on to contrast, and as always, something that I do believe is one of the most fundamental parts of any portrait, regardless of the element that we're working on. You want your shadows dark enough and your highlights bright enough in order to make whatever it is that you're drawing appear even more realistic. If you would like to see the full time-lapse tutorial with voiceover of this Hungarian Vizsla, I will link that in the description below. If you've got any art related questions, pop them in the comments. I am more than happy to help if I can. And if you could give it a like, a thumbs up, that really does help. And as I've mentioned, if you do want to get notified of the tutorials that I upload here to YouTube, hit the subscribe and the bell button. I'm going to be uploading another video next week. And as always, thank you so much for watching.